Under the relentless sun of Mississippi in the summer of 1854, the cotton field stretched endlessly, an ocean of green and white rippling with the weight of human toil. Each stalk seemed to bear not only the promise of profit, but also the imprint of suffering. And within this unforgiving landscape moved Clara, a young woman whose strength was forged in hardship, and whose spirit had been quietly resisting the oppression that surrounded her. She moved with a grace that belied the brutality of her life, fingers calloused from picking bowls from dawn until the sun bled its last light into the horizon. Around her, the murmurs of the enslaved men and women wove a tapestry of subdued sorrow and cautious hope, each whispering their own stories of loss, love, and survival. Clara had grown in this world, yet she was not defined solely by its cruelty. Her mind remained alert, her eyes sharp, watching the overseer's every move, noticing the subtle shifts of power that dictated life and death in the plantation's microcosm. The overseers were relentless, their whips cracking through the humid air, each snap a reminder of authority and fear, each scar a mark of submission enforced. Yet, Clara carried an inner flame, a defiance that did not rely on weapons or numbers, but on the quiet, fierce insistence of her presence, the unwavering dignity with which she performed her work, and the calculated acts of resistance that others often failed to recognize as rebellion. She understood that survival required patience. That courage often manifested in the smallest gestures, the way she protected younger children from punishment, how she hid bits of food or medicine for those too weak to gather for themselves, or the way she memorized the patterns of the overseer's patrols to shield her fellow workers from unnecessary violence. The plantation itself was a machine of terror and efficiency, a sprawling complex of fields, quarters, and the imposing white mansion that stood like a citadel over those who labored beneath its shadow. The rhythm of labor was unceasing, the oppressive cadence of the enslaved marking time like a slow, relentless drum. Yet within that rhythm, Clara found pockets of resistance, a shared glance that carried a warning, a note passed silently, a story told at night under the eaves of the quarters that reminded them of a world beyond chains. These acts, small as they were, became the invisible threads of a communal resilience, a quiet assertion that they had not surrendered their humanity. Clara's family had been bound to this land for generations, and she had known the horrors of the fields from a young age. Her mother had taught her the names of plants that could heal, the songs that could carry messages, and the way to move silently so as not to attract the overseer's attention. Her father, broken in body but unbowed in spirit, had shown her that dignity could persist even when every element of society attempted to strip it away. Clara inherited from them both a subtle defiance and understanding that even in chains, one could cultivate freedom in the mind and soul. The story of Clara's courage was not a tale of sudden rebellion, but of accumulated acts of bravery, each one a seed planted in the soil of oppression, destined to bloom in moments when survival intersected with the possibility of justice. In the quarters, Clara became a quiet pillar, someone who others turned to when fear and despair threatened to overtake them. She listened more than she spoke, observing the intricate social hierarchies imposed by the enslavers, understanding which confrontations could be survived and which must be weathered in silence. Her keen intelligence allowed her to anticipate moments of danger, and her empathy ensured that she never lost sight of the suffering around her, even as she navigated the precarious balance between submission and defiance. The overseer saw her as merely another worker, perhaps clever, but not enough to pose a threat, underestimating the fire that smoldered in her eyes. This misjudgment became a subtle weapon. Clara knew that power often resided not in brute force, but in perception, in the ability to make the oppressors believe they controlled everything, while the enslaved quietly maintained their own networks of protection, communication, and resistance. She observed the daily rituals of punishment, noting the marks left on bodies and the terror etched into faces. Each instance of cruelty hardened her resolve, but it also honed her strategies for survival and defense. She knew the rhythms of fear, how to diffuse them, and how to channel them into discreet defiance that could ripple outward. Without drawing immediate wrath, the cotton fields were her stage and her battlefield, a place where every movement had meaning beyond labor. Every step she took, every stalk she bent, carried with it the weight of resistance, small, almost invisible acts that collectively challenged the omnipresent brutality. At night, when the sun dipped below the horizon and the air grew thick with humidity and the scent of earth and sweat, Clara walked the narrow paths between the quarters, listening to the whispered fears and dreams of her companions. She became a repository of their stories, a keeper of the quiet rebellions that went unnoticed by the enslavers. She encouraged them not through speeches or overt acts, but through example, showing that courage could persist even in the harshest conditions, that human dignity could survive where cruelty seemed absolute. The plantation's economy was driven by relentless extraction, and every day brought new demands, new ways to enforce submission. Yet in the spaces between orders and supervision, Clara and others carved out moments of autonomy, singing softly to lift spirits, exchanging secret glances, sharing scraps of food and medicine. These moments, seemingly insignificant, accumulated over time into a network of moral resistance, a defiance that needed no weapons because it existed in the realm of human will and conscience. The tension between visibility and concealment defined Clara's life. She knew that to survive and protect others, she had to appear compliant while carefully cultivating the structures of rebellion that could one day challenge the authority of the enslavers. This dual existence required extraordinary skill. She had to read human behavior with precision, anticipate the unpredictable temper of overseers, and find ways to protect those most vulnerable without exposing herself unnecessarily. Each day was a calculated dance, each action weighted with moral and practical significance. Even the smallest choices had a bend of stock: when to look away, when to offer comfort carried consequences. Clara understood the economy of attention and power within the fields, using it to shield herself and others, to create the illusion of obedience while secretly maintaining a sphere of autonomy. The enslaved workers shared a language of subtle resistance, a code of gestures, looks, and sounds that communicated warnings, offered solace, or coordinated efforts to mitigate the violence of their environment. Clara became fluent in this language, mastering its nuances and using it to protect those around her. She encouraged cooperation, empathy, and shared vigilance, understanding that strength in numbers often manifested not in open confrontation, but in the collective maintenance of humanity and dignity under unrelenting oppression. And in the quiet moments, when night descended and the fields were bathed in the silver glow of the moon, Clara would walk alone among the stalks, feeling the weight of her ancestors' struggles, their hopes and despair mingling in the air around her. She thought of the long history of resistance embedded in the very soil of the South, of those who had fought, survived, and sometimes died, leaving traces of courage that could guide the living. Each night, the fields whispered to her, carrying stories of survival and warning, and she listened, absorbing them into herself, learning from the past even as she prepared for the present. She knew the stakes of defiance, the dangers of being seen as anything more than compliant. And yet she also knew that submission was not the only path to survival. The human spirit, when nurtured and protected, could endure in ways the enslavers could not fully comprehend. Clara's quiet defiance, her steadfast commitment to protecting others, her careful cultivation of knowledge and awareness, made her a figure of hope within a world designed to extinguish it. The sun rose each day over the fields, relentless and unyielding, but so too did Clara's resolve. In every measured step, every cautious glance, every act of concealed resistance, she embodied a resilience that could not be quantified, a courage that transcended her immediate circumstances. Her presence reminded the enslaved that even in a system designed to crush the body and spirit, dignity, strategy, and moral courage could persist, nurtured in the smallest gestures, the quietest acts, the decisions made in the shadows of oppression. In this way, Clara became more than a survivor. She became a symbol of what it meant to stand in the face of brutality, to navigate the impossible demands of the cotton fields, and to transform suffering into a catalyst for enduring, meaningful resistance. Every day she labored, every night she observed, every moment she protected those around her, was a thread in the larger tapestry of defiance, a tapestry woven not with weapons or fire, but with unbroken human spirit, courage, and unwavering moral clarity. The plantation sought to consume her, to reduce her to labor and silence, but Clara's mind remained free, a crucible of insight and courage, and through her quiet actions, she ensured that freedom lived on in the hearts of those who labored beside her, waiting for the day when the oppressive world might be met with the full force of their collective, unyielding defiance. As the oppressive heat of the Mississippi summer settled into the marrow of bones, and the air thickened with the mingling scents of sweat, soil, and cotton, Clara's awareness sharpened with every movement through the fields. The morning labor began before the sun had risen fully, a rigid routine dictated by the overseer's merciless eyes and the clatter of the plantation bell. Each day was a study in observation, calculation, and endurance, and Clara had learned early to treat it as both a battlefield and a classroom. She knew the subtle shifts in the overseer's moves, the way a glance could signal impending violence, and she understood the value of timing, of patience, of strategic silence. Her defiance was not loud. It was precise, hidden in plain sight, executed through the careful management of human connections and the discreet cultivation of solidarity among the enslaved. The younger children were always her primary concern. Small hands, untrained in the deadly rhythm of the cotton fields, often faltered under the punishing demands, and Clara quietly intervened whenever possible. A gently nudged hand to straighten posture, a whispered warning of an approaching overseer, a shared piece of bread, or a hidden scrap of medicine. These acts of protection were small, but they carried immense weight, both in practical survival and in the subtle assertion that they were more than tools, more than property, more than expendable bodies. Around her, the laborers moved in a mechanical synchrony, their movements choreographed by the relentless expectations of work and punishment. Yet Clara perceived a hidden life within this rhythm, a subtle network of communication that ran like underground streams beneath the visible toil. Eyes met and lingered for seconds longer than necessary. Fingers brushed while picking. A cough or shuffle served as a signal to take cover or prepare for an imminent threat. Clara had become adept at reading these invisible currents, understanding them as lifelines that ensured mutual survival. She had witnessed countless examples of the overseer's brutality, the crack of the whip cutting through the humid air like a jagged sound of authority. Each scar on her back, each sob muffled into the dirt, reinforced the urgent necessity of caution and subtlety in her acts of resistance. But for Clara, the cruelty of the overseers did not inspire resignation. It reinforced her resolve to maintain her humanity, to assert the dignity of those around her, to sow resilience where despair threatened to take root. Her defiance took shape in countless small rebellions, a child guided safely away from danger, a clandestine note passed between quarters warning of impending punishment, a moment of comfort extended to a weeping comrade. These acts were the currency of hope, a quiet but persistent assertion that the enslaved retained control over aspects of their lives, no matter how circumscribed by oppression. Within the quarters, Clara's influence became evident. Women and men alike looked to her, sometimes without even articulating why. She listened with patient attentiveness, absorbing stories of suffering, whispers of resistance, and strategies for coping with the endless pressures of plantation life. Her mind cataloged the details, the pattern of overseers' patrols, the timing of punishments, the vulnerabilities in the chain of command, and she used this knowledge to safeguard her peers. In this environment, knowledge itself became a weapon. Clara knew that overt defiance could result in death, that a poorly timed act of rebellion could devastate those around her, and that true courage often required restraint. She balanced these realities with an instinctive understanding of morality and justice, always seeking ways to assert agency without exposing her companions to unnecessary risk. The white mansion loomed over the fields like a constant reminder of who held power and who bore its consequences. Clara had observed it with a mix of curiosity, caution, and strategic calculation. She noted the comings and goings of the master and mistress, the subtle ways in which their presence altered the atmosphere of labor, the signals sent through body language and tone of voice. This meticulous attention allowed her to anticipate punishments, to shield vulnerable workers, and occasionally to redirect small measures of the plantation's terror away from those who could not defend themselves. The plantation itself functioned as a tightly controlled ecosystem, with every building, path, and field meticulously organized to enforce hierarchy and authority. Yet within this system, Clara discovered pockets of autonomy, spaces where human ingenuity and courage could flourish unnoticed. She understood that defiance did not always require confrontation. Sometimes the act of survival, of caring for others, of maintaining dignity in a world designed to erase it, was rebellion enough. Clara's family history anchored her resolve. Her parents had instilled in her a sense of identity and a deep understanding of the moral stakes of life under slavery. Her mother's knowledge of healing herbs, songs, and covert communication, and her father's unbroken spirit in the face of physical punishment, provided her with both practical skills and an enduring moral compass. From them, Clara learned that resistance could be cultivated in the mind and spirit even when the body was constrained, that courage could manifest in subtle forms, and that leadership did not always require recognition or reward. The social dynamics within the enslaved community were complex, shaped by necessity, fear, and shared survival strategies. Clara navigated these intricacies with care, recognizing that alliances and trust were both fragile and essential. She worked to build cohesion among the workers, fostering networks of support that allowed them to anticipate danger, share resources, and preserve a measure of autonomy. These human connections became her lifeline, a web of solidarity that extended far beyond the immediate tasks of the fields. Her acts of defiance were often psychological and symbolic. She refused to internalize the language of inferiority imposed by the enslavers, maintaining a posture and demeanor that asserted dignity even in the face of constant intimidation. Her gaze, her silence, her small acts of moral courage all conveyed a message of unbroken spirit to those around her, a reminder that human worth could not be erased by chains or cruelty. In the oppressive stillness of midday, when the sun hung heavy over the fields and the air shimmered with heat, Clara would pause in her work just long enough to observe the subtle movements of the overseers, to assess the condition of her companions, and to consider the risks of any immediate actions. These moments of observation were not idleness, but deliberate strategy, a mental rehearsal of scenarios and contingencies that allowed her to navigate the dangers of the plantation with calculated precision. Even in such constrained circumstances, she found ways to assert agency. When an overseer's attention was elsewhere, she would adjust the position of a younger worker to spare them pain, slip a small portion of food to someone too weak to reach the table, or pass a whispered message that preserved safety and morale. These acts, though seemingly minor, were threads in the broader tapestry of resistance that Clara wove quietly through the quarters and fields. Each act carried risk, yet each also reinforced the shared humanity of those around her, reminding them that they were more than instruments of labor, that they had rights to dignity, care, and survival. The plantation was a crucible of both cruelty and ingenuity. Workers developed adaptive strategies for coping with the physical demands of labor and the psychological pressures of constant surveillance. Clara's intelligence and empathy positioned her as a natural guide within this system. She understood the balance between risk and reward, between defiance and survival, and she used her insight to nurture the resilience of her peers. Her careful attention to detail tracking patrol schedules, understanding the temperament of overseers, noting shifts in the master's expectations gave her a subtle but crucial advantage in preserving life and fostering quiet resistance. In the long hours of the afternoon, when exhaustion threatened to sap morale and discipline, Clara became a quiet anchor for those around her. Her presence alone was a source of reassurance, a living example of composure and fortitude. She would guide the children through the most punishing stretches of labor, redirect the fearful or despondent, and offer solace to those burdened by grief or injury. Her actions demonstrated that leadership and courage were not measured solely by confrontation, but by consistency, care, and moral clarity under unrelenting pressure. The night brought a different rhythm, one of clandestine communication and subtle coordination. In the dim glow of lanterns or under the moonlight filtering through the quarter windows, Clara would share information, exchange warnings, and plan small interventions to mitigate the overseer's cruelty. These nocturnal efforts were critical, as they allowed the enslaved to create a measure of safety and to prepare for the uncertainties of the coming day. It was in these moments that Clara's quiet defiance truly shone, as she leveraged knowledge, observation, and human connection to preserve life, foster dignity, and sustain hope. Her understanding of human psychology became an essential tool. She recognized fear not as a weakness, but as a force to be navigated, as she learned to use empathy to anticipate reactions, to offer reassurance, and to shape behavior in ways that maximized survival and minimized harm. Her acts of resistance were interwoven with this deep understanding of her environment and the people within it, allowing her to wield influence without overt confrontation. The cotton fields themselves, the seemingly endless expanse of labor, became a canvas for Clara's quiet rebellion. Every careful step, every measured gesture, every act of attention toward her fellow workers was a stroke of moral courage and practical defiance. She transformed the repetitive, punishing work into an arena where dignity could persist, where strategies of protection and resistance could flourish unnoticed, and where hope could be nurtured like a fragile but enduring flame. Clara's life on the plantation in 1854 was defined by this duality, the relentless demand of physical labor and the subtle, strategic cultivation of moral and social resistance. She understood that freedom might not be immediate or overt, but it could exist in acts of care, courage, and solidarity that preserved humanity and prepared the seeds of future defiance. The story of her days, her vigilance, and her quiet courage was a testament to the resilience of those who endured oppression, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, the human spirit could assert itself, protect itself, and sustain a measure of dignity that no whip or order could ever fully extinguish. In this way, Clara's life became a living mosaic of resistance, a narrative composed of countless small acts, each one a subtle yet profound assertion of autonomy, morality, and courage. Every choice she made, how to bend, how to shield, how to observe, how to nurture, was a deliberate defiance of a system designed to erase her and those she cared for. She moved through the cotton fields with a purpose that was at once practical and symbolic, shaping not only survival, but also the moral and emotional landscape of her community. In the shadows of oppression, Clara became a quiet architect of defiance, demonstrating that courage could be measured not solely in acts of confrontation, but in persistence, strategy, and the unyielding protection of human dignity. The humid air of late summer in 1850 clung to Clara's skin like a persistent weight, and yet she moved through the cotton fields with a grace that belied exhaustion, her mind alert to every detail, every whisper of danger, every flicker of opportunity. The overseers' patrols had grown more unpredictable, their tempers sharpened by the pressures of the plantation economy. Yet Clara had learned to read the rhythms of cruelty like the lines of a familiar map. She knew the exact moments when punishment could erupt, the subtle shifts in posture that signaled a lash, and she had cultivated an instinct for protecting those around her, without attracting attention to herself. Every step she took in the fields was measured, deliberate, a balance between obedience and silent defiance. It was in these moments, under the scorching sun and the watchful eyes of those who sought to dominate, that Clara's internal fortitude became visible to those who knew how to look. The enslaved community relied on such figures, the ones who could anticipate danger, who could act decisively without drawing punishment, who could sustain hope when despair threatened to consume all. Clara had become one of these figures. Her reputation was quiet but solid. She was trusted, observed, and emulated not through proclamations or speeches, but through consistent action, moral clarity, and strategic courage. In the quarters, where the heat was slightly less oppressive and the whispers of night could rise unchallenged, Clara worked tirelessly to fortify the bonds of solidarity. She listened to stories of past rebellions, of escapes narrowly thwarted, of resilience against impossible odds. She cataloged this oral history in her mind, not merely as narrative, but as instruction, the mistakes to avoid, the strategies to emulate, the courage to preserve and pass on. It was not enough to survive physically. Survival required psychological and moral resistance, the maintenance of dignity under conditions designed to obliterate it. Clara's understanding of this principle guided her every action. She observed the plantation's hierarchy with a keen eye. The master and mistress, distant but omnipresent, exerted authority that trickled down through overseers, drivers, and other appointed enforcers. Each layer of control was carefully monitored, and Clara studied it all, noting weaknesses, predicting overreaches, and finding subtle ways to subvert the system's intended effects. She knew that direct confrontation could result in brutal retaliation, yet she also understood that every small act of autonomy, every assertion of dignity, chipped away at the absolute control the enslavers believed they possessed. Children were especially vulnerable, and Clara's maternal instincts toward them were heightened by her awareness of the physical and psychological dangers that stalked every moment of their days. She guided their hands, shielded them from harsh punishments, and imparted lessons of caution and resilience, preparing them not just for immediate survival, but for a future in which their spirits could endure. Her acts of protection were not dramatic. They were subtle, careful, and intentional, demonstrating that courage often manifests in quiet, sustained vigilance rather than grand gestures. The cotton fields themselves were both instrument of oppression and arena for covert resistance. Every row, every stalk, every glimmer of sunlight reflected off the white bolls was a reminder of the wealth extracted from human labor and suffering. Yet within this landscape, Clara moved like a tactician, navigating danger and cultivating acts of rebellion that would remain invisible to the overseers, but were deeply meaningful to those around her. She used knowledge as power. She knew the timing of patrols, the moods of overseers, the vulnerabilities in their attention. Through observation, she created opportunities to ease suffering, to share resources, to protect and guide others, asserting control over small, but vital aspects of life under tyranny. In these acts, she became more than a laborer. She became a quiet architect of survival, a strategist whose tools were empathy, foresight, and moral courage. The social networks within the enslaved quarters were delicate yet essential. Trust had to be earned and maintained, as betrayal or misjudgment could mean severe punishment or death. Clara's integrity and careful attention to human relationships allowed her to cultivate alliances that extended safety and knowledge to others. She communicated in ways that were subtle and nuanced to touch, a glance, a coded word, and through these methods maintained a shared awareness that helped safeguard lives. Her leadership was ethical, compassionate, and strategic, providing a counterpoint to the omnipresent cruelty of the plantation system. Punishment, ever looming, shaped daily existence, yet Clara's presence mitigated its effects. She anticipated moments of danger, offering guidance and protection, and she became a repository of knowledge for younger and less experienced workers. In her mind, she mapped the risks, the opportunities, and the delicate moral calculus required to survive while asserting autonomy and preserving dignity. Her skill was remarkable. She balanced obedience and resistance with precision, embodying both the survivalist's caution and the rebel's courage. By mid-afternoon, when the heat reached its zenith and labor threatened to break spirits, Clara's influence became tangible. Workers who might have faltered found renewed focus in her guidance. Children who were prone to panic were steadied by her presence, and despairing adults drew comfort from her calm vigilance. In these moments, she demonstrated the transformative power of quiet leadership, showing that courage and moral clarity could ripple through a community, sustaining life even under the most relentless oppression. She understood that resistance was not always a matter of overt action. Sometimes it was an assertion of humanity, a refusal to surrender to the dehumanizing system around her. The plantation's infrastructure, the quarters, the fields. The mansion was designed to enforce hierarchy and maintain dominance. Yet Clara's understanding of these spaces allowed her to navigate and subtly subvert the system. She memorized paths, noted the routines of those in power, and identified spaces where discretion could protect lives. Through these strategies, she ensured that the enslaved could maintain a degree of autonomy and safety, even as the outward appearances of obedience concealed acts of defiance and solidarity. Food, water, and medical supplies were scarce and strictly controlled. Yet Clara found ways to distribute them with care and discretion. She rationed her own share, hid provisions for those in need, and taught others the small, essential skills of survival under deprivation. Her acts of resourcefulness were another layer of resistance, a quiet assertion that even in the face of systemic deprivation, human ingenuity and compassion could create life-sustaining networks. Knowledge became her weapon, empathy her shield, and courage her guide. As the sun sank toward the horizon and shadows lengthened across the fields, Clara's vigilance did not waver. Evening brought a shift in rhythm. Labor ceased, yet the work of observation, planning, and protection continued in the dim light of the quarters. Here, she could speak softly, pass warnings, share knowledge, and prepare for the challenges of the coming day. These nocturnal activities were integral to the survival and moral resilience of the community, providing a counterbalance to the day's labor and the ever-present threat of violence. The psychological landscape of the plantation was as treacherous as the physical one. Fear was pervasive, yet Clara recognized that fear could be transformed into action, foresight, and caution. She taught those around her to channel anxiety into vigilance, to anticipate danger without being paralyzed by it, and to act decisively when small opportunities for protection or resistance arose. Her understanding of human psychology, of the nuanced interactions between power and submission, allowed her to navigate this perilous terrain with remarkable skill. Music, song, and oral storytelling became tools of cultural preservation and subtle defiance. Clara encouraged these practices, recognizing their power to sustain morale, transmit knowledge, and assert identity in the face of systematic attempts to erase it. Through songs, the enslaved communicated warnings, shared news, and reinforced communal bonds, and Clara's leadership helped ensure that these channels remained vibrant, discreet, and effective. Each night, she reflected on the delicate balance between visible obedience and invisible rebellion, understanding that her survival and that of her companions depended on maintaining this equilibrium. She planned, anticipated, and acted with an almost preternatural sense of timing, ensuring that courage was expressed in ways that maximized protection and minimized risk. Her decisions were deliberate, informed by knowledge, observation, and empathy, each one a calculated effort to preserve life and dignity. Within the fields, Clara's presence became a subtle signal to others, a reassurance that resilience was possible, that autonomy could be nurtured even under oppression, that the human spirit could assert itself in ways unseen but deeply felt. She moved with intention, blending labor with vigilance, performance with subversion, her every action a thread in a tapestry of survival and quiet resistance. The oppressive hierarchy of the plantation was constant, yet Clara found moments of subtle triumph, a child protected from punishment, a warning delivered in time, a small act of defiance that went unnoticed by those who wielded overt power. These moments were victories, not dramatic, but deeply significant, sustaining hope and affirming the possibility of moral agency in an environment designed to crush it. The long-term strategies she cultivated were not born from impulse, but from careful observation and reflection. Clara understood that survival was cumulative, each act of protection, each piece of knowledge passed on, each assertion of dignity contributed to the broader capacity for resistance and resilience within the enslaved community. Through her leadership, she created a microcosm of autonomy and humanity within a system built to suppress both. Her courage was quiet, unassuming, yet profoundly effective, and it resonated through the cotton fields, the quarters, and the hearts of those she guided. By maintaining this delicate balance, Clara transformed the quotidian horrors of labor into opportunities for moral assertion, human connection, and strategic defiance. Every measured step in the field, every glance exchanged, every act of discretion was a building block in the ongoing struggle to preserve life, dignity, and hope in a world designed to eradicate them. She became a living testament to the power of strategy, empathy, and quiet courage, showing that even under relentless oppression, human beings could exercise agency, protect one another, and assert their intrinsic worth. The sun finally disappeared beyond the horizon, yet Clara's work continued in the shadows, a constant vigilance that never faltered. In the stillness of night, she and those she guided planned, observed, and prepared, knowing that survival required both patience and foresight. That courage often manifested in subtle, sustained acts rather than dramatic gestures, and that every effort to protect life and preserve dignity was itself an act of defiance against a system built to destroy it. As the first faint light of dawn stretched across the Mississippi fields, Clara rose once more into the rhythm of labor, her body aching yet her mind sharper than ever. The cotton fields were merciless in their expanse, rows upon rows of stalks glistening with dew and sweat, their whitened bowls reflecting the sun's early glare like shards of bone. The overseers were already moving along their patrols, eyes sharp, whips poised, their presence a constant reminder of the fragile line between compliance and catastrophe. But Clara had learned the art of moving through this world with quiet precision. Her hands worked the stalks, her movements measured and deliberate, yet her mind cataloged every detail, the angles of sunlight that cast shadows concealing escape, the pacing of the overseers, the murmurs of those around her, the subtle signs that hinted at impending danger. Each day was a negotiation of survival, a careful balance between obedience and subtle resistance, and Clara had become a master of this precarious dance. Within the quarters, the pulse of life beat differently. It was here that the enslaved could whisper, share, and breathe in ways impossible under the unforgiving scrutiny of the fields. Clara moved among them with a gentle authority, offering guidance, solace, and strategic insight. She understood the delicate equilibrium required to maintain trust, to protect the vulnerable, and to foster cohesion. Here, her influence was profound, her acts of leadership subtle, but unmistakable, arranging hidden supplies of food, imparting knowledge of herbs and remedies, and teaching the children skills necessary to navigate both the physical and psychological hazards of the plantation. The quarters became a web of quiet resistance, a space where human dignity could persist, nurtured through collaboration and careful planning. Clara's understanding of the plantation's hierarchy extended beyond mere observation. She perceived the intricate interplay of power, fear, and self-interest that shaped every interaction. The master and mistress exerted control through authority and surveillance, yet the overseers and drivers often acted with personal caprice, their own insecurities magnified by the power they wielded over the enslaved. Clara learned to read these layers of influence, anticipating reactions, predicting patterns, and shaping outcomes in ways that protected lives while preserving the appearance of compliance. Her strategic intelligence was as vital as her physical endurance, and she wielded it with the same precision with which she handled the cotton stalks under the sun. Even the youngest children sensed her vigilance and drew comfort from it. Clara became a beacon of stability and hope, offering reassurance through her presence alone. A glance, a nod, a whispered instruction, these gestures communicated safety, guidance, and moral clarity in a world designed to instill fear. She understood that leadership in such circumstances was not performative. It was relational, ethical, and deeply practical. Every act had consequences, and the weight of those decisions rested on her shoulders with relentless intensity. Food, water, and other resources were scarce, and their distribution could dictate survival. Clara became adept at allocating these essentials with discretion, ensuring that those most in need received what they required, without provoking suspicion or punishment from the overseers. Her acts of care were layered with strategy, a hidden ration here, a shared portion there, each small gesture reinforcing trust, sustaining life, and asserting agency within a system that sought to deny it. As the day wore on, the labor in the fields intensified, the heat of the sun pressing down like an unyielding force, the whips of overseers cracking in rhythm with exhaustion and fear. Clara moved with unbroken attention, guiding the less experienced, shielding the vulnerable, and observing the patrols with meticulous care. Every footfall, every bend of the stalk, every exchange of a glance carried weight, a calculated measure of safety and moral assertion. The plantation's hierarchy, though rigid, was not infallible. Clara noted the nuances of authority, the master's rare appearances, the mistress's expectations, the overseer's whims, and the subtle shifts that accompanied stress, fatigue, or favoritism. She understood that the illusion of control could be maintained while quietly subverting it, and she used this understanding to shield those most vulnerable from punishment, to anticipate opportunities for small victories, and to nurture the sense of moral agency within the enslaved. Physical punishment was an ever-present threat, shaping every movement, every glance, every breath. Yet Clara's subtle acts of defiance, the repositioning of a child, the discreet sharing of food, the passing of a warning became threads of resilience, weaving a fabric of survival that the overseers could neither see nor fully suppress. These acts, repeated daily and executed with precision, were a form of rebellion in their own right, asserting the enduring presence of autonomy, compassion, and moral clarity amidst systemic cruelty. Even the repetition of labor, the monotonous bending and plucking, the rhythmic tedium enforced by coercion, became an arena for Clara's quiet mastery. She guided her companions not just physically, but psychologically, modeling endurance, composure, and alertness. Her influence was subtle, yet tangible. Children were steadied, fearful adults reassured, and a sense of collective resilience cultivated through her consistent presence and measured interventions. The quarters provided another stage for her ingenuity and leadership. By night, she orchestrated clandestine gatherings, disseminated warnings, shared knowledge of herbs and remedies, and reinforced social bonds critical to survival. Stories and songs became instruments of memory and moral instruction, transmitting knowledge about the world beyond the plantation while preserving identity and cultural continuity. Clara nurtured these practices, understanding that resistance was not only physical, but also cultural, ethical, and psychological. Knowledge, carefully observed and applied, became her most powerful tool. She memorized the patterns of the overseers' movements, anticipated their decisions, and used this insight to protect the most vulnerable and to shield her own strategic activities. Food, scarce and tightly controlled, was allocated with discretion, a hidden ration here, a shared portion there. Each act reinforced trust and cohesion, preserving life and sustaining the subtle economy of resilience that Clara maintained with remarkable skill. By mid-afternoon, as the sun baked the earth and exhaustion pressed heavily on every body, Clara's role as anchor became even more apparent. Her steady presence offered reassurance to those whose spirits faltered. Her subtle guidance prevented mishaps, and her vigilance allowed small interventions that could spare pain or humiliation. These acts, though invisible to the overseers, were profound in their cumulative effect. They maintained not only life, but also a sense of dignity, morality, and strategic agency in a system designed to strip all three away. Psychological survival was as important as physical endurance, and Clara was acutely attuned to this dimension. She taught those around her to channel fear into vigilance, to act decisively when opportunities arose, and to maintain composure under relentless pressure. Every gesture, every glance, Every carefully chosen word contributed to the cultivation of resilience and moral strength. She understood that the smallest intervention, shielding a child from punishment, redistributing a portion of food, passing a warning about an approaching overseer, were themselves acts of rebellion and affirmation, asserting human dignity where the plantation sought to erase it. As dusk approached and the oppressive glare of the sun softened into shadow, Clara's vigilance shifted seamlessly into nocturnal coordination. Within the dim light of the quarters, she facilitated the exchange of information, the planning of protective strategies, and the transmission of knowledge essential to survival. She oversaw these activities with an ethic of care and a strategic mind, ensuring that communication flowed effectively without attracting attention from the enslavers. Through these nocturnal efforts, the enslaved community maintained a delicate but vital network of trust, protection, and resilience. Cultural practices, song, storytelling, and oral instruction were vital components of this system. Clara encouraged and preserved these traditions, understanding that they transmitted history, reinforced identity, and strengthened the communal bonds essential for survival. In these shared spaces, the enslaved nurtured their humanity, reinforced moral frameworks, and asserted agency over their lives in subtle but enduring ways. Each night, Clara reflected on the day's events, evaluating successes, noting vulnerabilities, and planning for contingencies. Her foresight was meticulous, informed by keen observation, experience, and a profound understanding of human nature. She balanced immediate interventions with long-term strategies, ensuring that the preservation of life, dignity, and autonomy was not left to chance, but cultivated through deliberate action. Her acts were deliberate, ethical, and highly effective, ensuring that courage, protection, and strategic insight were consistently applied throughout the community. The fields, oppressive and unyielding, became a theater for Clara's moral and strategic authority. Each measured step, each subtle gesture, each act of observation and protection contributed to a larger pattern of resistance. The enslaved workers, guided by her example, learned to navigate the perils of labor, to anticipate authority, and to support one another in ways that reinforced both survival and dignity. In this carefully constructed network, even the youngest and weakest had roles to play, protected and guided by Clara's vigilance and insight. Despite the ever-present threat of violence, Clara's leadership fostered a profound sense of moral agency. She demonstrated that acts of care, foresight, and ethical courage could counterbalance oppression in meaningful ways. Every choice she made, how to intervene, how to observe, how to distribute resources, how to communicate, was informed by a combination of strategy, empathy, and moral clarity. Her quiet defiance became an invisible yet powerful force, shaping behavior, protecting lives, and sustaining hope within a system designed to extinguish both. The cumulative impact of Clara's actions was profound. She preserved life, nurtured dignity, and cultivated resilience in a community under constant threat. Her ability to balance obedience and resistance, vigilance and compassion, strategy and empathy ensured that the enslaved could maintain a measure of autonomy, identity, and hope even in the harshest conditions. Through her quiet, sustained efforts, Clara transformed the oppressive environment of the plantation into a space where moral and practical agency could persist. Her leadership, embedded in careful observation, strategic planning, and ethical guidance, demonstrated that courage was not solely the province of overt rebellion, but could be expressed through consistent, deliberate, and compassionate action. As the night deepened and the plantation settled into uneasy silence, Clara's work continued. She monitored, guided, and reinforced the networks of trust and protection she had cultivated. Her presence ensured that, despite exhaustion, fear, and the ever-present threat of punishment, the enslaved community retained the capacity for resilience, moral clarity, and strategic defiance. Each intervention, each act of care, each subtle assertion of autonomy contributed to a broader tapestry of resistance, proving that human dignity, courage, and agency can endure even under relentless oppression. In this way, Clara's life became a testament to the enduring power of quiet leadership, ethical courage, and the sustained cultivation of hope and resilience in the face of systemic cruelty. The oppressive heat of late summer clung to every inch of the Mississippi plantation, pressing down upon the cotton fields with a weight that seemed almost tangible. Yet Clara moved through this landscape with a focus that was both precise and compassionate. Each day brought the same external rhythm of labor and threat, yet Clara understood that the true battle was not in the visible toil, but in the subtle assertion of agency, the preservation of dignity, and the protection of those around her. The overseer's watchful eyes and snapping whips dictated the outward motions, but Clara's mind was engaged in a constant calculus of risk, observation, and intervention. She noted every glance, every twitch of a hand, every slight falter in movement, interpreting them as signals of immediate danger or opportunity for subtle resistance. In the children, she saw both vulnerability and potential, and she guided their movements, whispered cautionary advice, and transmitted lessons in vigilance and resilience. Astor's current methods were invisible to the overseers, but profoundly impactful to those under her care, embedding knowledge and courage where it was most needed. The laborers around her followed the unrelenting rhythm imposed by the plantation. Yet Clara perceived a hidden network of communication threading through the monotonous movements. A shifted gaze, a barely perceptible gesture, the softest of cough serving as a signal of warning or encouragement. She had become fluent in this quiet language of survival, using it to coordinate interventions, redistribute care, and maintain cohesion. These invisible threads were essential lifelines, sustaining the moral and physical well-being of the enslaved community. Her influence extended beyond immediate physical protection into the very moral fabric of life on the plantation. She taught through example, demonstrating endurance, composure, and strategic thinking, and instilled in others an understanding that courage was not always loud, and defiance not always public. Each carefully measured action, whether a protected gesture, a discreet warning, or the allocation of scarce food served to assert human dignity, in a system designed to strip it away. Within the quarters, Clara's presence became even more significant. Here, removed from the direct gaze of the overseers, she fostered an environment of education, cultural preservation, and strategic planning. Stories of past uprisings, songs that carried warnings, and oral instruction on practical skills were all carefully cultivated under her guidance. These practices were vital, ensuring that knowledge, identity, and communal bonds survived the daily hardships imposed by the plantation. Clara recognized that these cultural forms of resistance were as crucial as physical acts of protection, preserving morale, transmitting history, and reinforcing a sense of agency among the enslaved. Observing the plantation's hierarchy, Clara discerned the subtleties of power, the master's rare but commanding presence, the mistress's expectations, the unpredictable whims of overseers, and the hidden cracks in authority that could be leveraged to protect the vulnerable. She navigated this complex landscape with foresight, using discretion and strategic timing to ensure that her interventions remained unseen, yet effective. Each moment of observation informed her next action, every decision calibrated to preserve life, morale, and dignity. Punishment, ever present and unpredictable, shaped the pace and tenor of every day. Yet Clara's careful interventions mitigated its effects. She repositioned those at risk, whispered cautionary advice, and orchestrated subtle strategies that reduced exposure to harm. In these ways, she transformed a landscape of terror into one of cautious but meaningful autonomy. Each act of defiance, no matter how small, became a symbolic assertion of humanity, a reminder that the enslaved retained control over aspects of their lives even in extreme adversity. The rhythm of labor, repetition, and hardship provided a stage upon which Clara's strategic and moral acumen became evident. Her careful guidance steadied the children, reassured the fearful, and maintained a sense of cohesion among the laborers. She understood that the preservation of dignity and moral agency required consistency, attentiveness, and a profound understanding of human psychology. She cultivated resilience not just through physical protection, but through the transmission of knowledge, the modeling of composure, and the subtle reinforcement of ethical behavior. By the mid-afternoon, when the sun's oppressive glare reached its zenith, Clara's vigilance intensified. The workers were weary, their spirits tested by heat and relentless labor. Yet Clara's presence provided an anchor. She intervened subtly to prevent mistakes, offered quiet reassurances to those on the brink of despair, and ensured that crucial messages of warning and coordination passed undetected. These acts, though invisible to the overseers, had profound consequences, sustaining life, morale, and a sense of shared humanity. Night brought a shift in the dynamics of control. Within the dim quarters, Clara orchestrated the clandestine exchange of information, the planning of protective strategies, and the reinforcement of communal bonds. Her leadership here was strategic, ethical, and deeply relational. She ensured that communication flowed effectively, that trust was maintained, and that the most vulnerable were safeguarded against the unpredictable whims of authority. These nocturnal operations were as critical to survival as the day's interventions, preserving both life and moral autonomy. Music, song, and storytelling were woven into these nightly activities, serving as instruments of cultural resistance, moral education, and psychological sustenance. Clara encouraged the continuation of these practices, understanding their dual function, reinforcing communal identity while transmitting vital knowledge and strategies for resilience. The stories and songs became coded languages of warning, hope, and shared history, and Clara's guidance ensured their effectiveness and discretion. Every day, Clara reflected on her interventions and the delicate balance she maintained between compliance and defiance. She monitored threats, anticipated the consequences of action and inaction, and adjusted her strategies accordingly. Her decisions were informed by observation, empathy, and moral clarity, and each act was carefully calculated to preserve life and dignity while minimizing risk. Through this disciplined vigilance, she cultivated a network of resilience that extended across the fields and quarters, creating a framework of protection and guidance that shaped the daily lives of the enslaved. Within the oppressive expanse of the plantation, Clara's strategic use of human connection became a vital form of defense. She leveraged relationships, trust, and observation to navigate dangers and safeguard the community. Every gesture, glance, and whispered instruction carried weight, subtly directing behavior, providing guidance, and reinforcing collective resilience. Her influence was quiet but pervasive, shaping not only the immediate safety of her peers, but also instilling long-term strategies for survival and moral preservation. The oppressive infrastructure of the plantation, the mansion, the fields, the quarters was designed to enforce submission and erase individuality. Yet Clara discovered and cultivated spaces of agency. She used knowledge, foresight, and subtle intervention to create zones of relative safety and autonomy, ensuring that the enslaved retained a measure of control over their lives. Each carefully executed act, be it a protective adjustment in the fields, a ration discreetly distributed, or a warning quietly conveyed, was part of a broader strategy of survival and resistance. By night, Clara's work continued in the shadows. She monitored the quarters, facilitated coordination, shared knowledge, and reinforced the ethical framework that guided her interventions. Every interaction was infused with intention, aiming to preserve life, protect dignity, and sustain hope. Her vigilance and guidance ensured that even under relentless oppression, the enslaved community could maintain agency, resilience, and moral clarity. Through her actions, Clara demonstrated that courage and defiance could manifest in subtle, sustained, and highly effective forms. She embodied the principle that leadership does not always require confrontation or spectacle, but can be expressed through consistent attention, ethical decision-making, and the strategic preservation of life and dignity. The cumulative impact of Clara's work was profound. She preserved life, nurtured moral and psychological resilience, and reinforced the possibility of human agency in a system structured to extinguish it. Each day, each intervention, each act of careful protection contributed to a network of survival and defiance, a living testament to the capacity of human courage and ethical leadership to endure, even in the most oppressive circumstances. In every measured step, every protective gesture, every piece of knowledge passed on, Clara's influence extended beyond the immediate moment, shaping both the present and future capacities for resistance within the enslaved community. She transformed the brutality of the plantation into a stage upon which dignity, courage, and subtle rebellion could flourish, asserting that even in extreme conditions, human beings could preserve moral integrity, protect one another, and sustain hope. Her life, her vigilance, and her unwavering commitment to those around her became a beacon of strategic and ethical courage, a living narrative of quiet but persistent defiance that resonated through the cotton fields, the quarters, and the hearts of those she guided. Through Clara's sustained efforts, the enslaved were not merely surviving, they were asserting their humanity, cultivating resilience, and maintaining the capacity for moral and strategic action in a world designed to erase both. The Mississippi sun rose again, unrelenting, painting the cotton fields in stark contrast of white and green, each stalk a reminder of the wealth extracted from human suffering. Clara moved through the fields with her usual deliberate precision, her body bearing the physical toll of relentless labor, but her mind remained sharp, attuned to every nuance of danger and opportunity. The overseers, ever vigilant, had grown suspicious of subtle shifts in the behavior of the enslaved. Yet Clara's strategic awareness allowed her to navigate these threats with deft subtlety. She observed patterns of movement, mood, and fatigue, predicting where cruelty might strike next and positioning herself to intervene, to protect, and to maintain the fragile network of resilience she had spent years cultivating. Each act of vigilance, each whispered instruction, each quiet gesture of guidance became part of a larger tapestry of survival, one that preserved dignity and asserted moral agency in a world designed to obliterate both. Children clung to her presence, sensing safety and clarity in her attentiveness. She taught them not only how to avoid immediate danger, but how to cultivate inner fortitude, foresight, and discernment, the skills necessary to endure and, when opportunity arose, to resist. Her instruction was subtle, embedded in movement, gestures, and example, but it carried profound implications for the survival of those under her care. The adults, too, relied on Clara's vigilance. Her presence steadied nerves frayed by exhaustion, offered guidance when the overseer's attention wavered, and provided a channel for the discreet transmission of knowledge essential to survival. The subtle network of communication she had developed, glances, touches, hushed words, coded signals, ensured that information flowed where it was needed most, that warnings were delivered in time, and that moral support reinforced the community's cohesion. Her leadership was ethical, strategic, and relational, ensuring that the oppressed could preserve both life and dignity, even under the relentless machinery of the plantation. As the sun climbed higher, the labor intensified. Whips cracked with sudden ferocity, overseers moved unpredictably, and the physical demands threatened to crush both body and spirit. Yet Clara's calculated interventions mitigated harm, whether by discreetly shifting a child out of reach, adjusting the positioning of a worker, or communicating warnings that went unnoticed by those in power. These acts were invisible to the overseers, but resonated profoundly within the community, reinforcing trust, moral clarity, and the sustaining power of quiet defiance. The quarters, when the sun's glare became unbearable, offered a different kind of stage. Clara's guidance, there was no less strategic, no less vital. She facilitated the sharing of knowledge, reinforced cultural practices, and ensured that networks of trust remained intact. Songs, stories, and oral instruction were carefully cultivated under her supervision, serving as tools of resistance, identity preservation, and moral education. Through these cultural practices, the enslaved reinforced their shared history and transmitted practical knowledge, strategies for survival, and ethical frameworks to guide daily decisions. Observing the hierarchy of power, Clara continued to exploit the nuances of authority to protect and guide those under her care. The master's infrequent presence, the mistress's expectations, the overseer's idiosyncrasies all became variables in her ongoing strategic calculations. She navigated these dynamics with care, ensuring that her interventions preserved safety without provoking direct retribution, that her guidance reinforced cohesion without attracting scrutiny. Every action, every decision was calibrated to sustain life, reinforce moral clarity, and nurture the community's capacity for agency within extreme constraints. Punishment remained an ever-present specter, yet Clara's vigilance transformed the potential for harm into opportunities for subtle triumph. By anticipating moments of danger, reallocating resources, and delivering timely guidance, she reduced exposure to injury and humiliation, asserting the quiet but profound power of strategic moral courage. In these acts, she demonstrated that defiance was not always public. That courage could be measured in careful observation, discreet intervention, and the cultivation of resilience and hope. By afternoon, as the sun reached its zenith, the fields became a crucible of endurance and skill. Clara's presence stabilized the rhythm, her interventions preventing mistakes, reducing exposure to punishment, and providing reassurance. Even the most vulnerable, the young and inexperienced, learned through her example how to navigate the treacherous landscape of labor, authority, and risk. Her guidance was constant, subtle, and deeply effective, transforming the plantation's relentless oppression into an environment where moral agency and survival coexisted, however precariously. Nightfall brought a different set of challenges, but Clara's vigilance did not waver. Within the quarters, she orchestrated planning, knowledge sharing, and the reinforcement of communal bonds. She ensured that communication channels remained secure, that resources were distributed wisely, and that the most vulnerable were protected against the unpredictable whims of authority. These nightly operations were as critical as the day's interventions, preserving life, dignity, and the possibility of future resistance. Cultural practices, songs, storytelling, rituals were interwoven with these strategic activities, reinforcing identity, transmitting history, and bolstering morale. Clara recognized that survival was not merely a matter of physical endurance, but a sustaining memory, culture, and ethical frameworks that allowed the enslaved to maintain humanity under extreme conditions. Her leadership extended to shaping the moral and psychological landscape of the community. She modeled composure, strategic thinking, and ethical courage, demonstrating that every subtle act of vigilance, every protected gesture, every allocation of scarce resources was a declaration of resistance and humanity. Her guidance cultivated confidence, foresight, and resilience, allowing the enslaved to preserve agency and dignity even in the most constrained circumstances. In the quiet of night, Clara reflected on the cumulative effects of her work: the lives preserved, the moral clarity maintained, the networks of protection strengthened, and the culture of resilience perpetuated. Each day's interventions, though subtle, contributed to a broader tapestry of survival and defiance, proving that courage need not be loud to be transformative, that resistance could thrive even in invisibility, and that human dignity could endure where oppression sought to eradicate it. The plantation, vast and unyielding, became a stage for Clara's sustained moral and strategic agency. Each carefully orchestrated action, protective adjustments, discreet guidance, and strategic allocation of resources reinforced the community's capacity for survival and subtle defiance. Her influence radiated quietly yet powerfully, shaping behavior, reinforcing trust, and asserting moral authority amidst a system designed to suppress both. Through her vigilance and wisdom, Clara ensured that even under relentless oppression, the enslaved retained agency, identity, and hope. Her leadership demonstrated that courage is often cumulative, composed of countless small acts, each contributing to the preservation of life and moral integrity. The physical and psychological terrain of the plantation, though intended to crush spirit and agency, became a landscape where subtle acts of defiance, strategic insight, and moral courage persisted. Clara's consistent, careful guidance transformed this environment, fostering resilience, reinforcing human dignity, and sustaining hope. Every intervention, every protective measure, every act of cultural preservation extended the capacity for resistance, ensuring that the enslaved could navigate danger, maintain cohesion, and assert their humanity under conditions designed to obliterate it. By dawn, as the first light crept over the cotton fields, Clara's work was already underway. She had become more than a figure of guidance and protection. She embodied the enduring power of strategic courage, ethical leadership, and moral resilience. Her presence, decisions, and interventions shaped the daily existence of the enslaved, ensuring that survival was coupled with dignity, autonomy, and hope. In the stillness of morning, the cotton field seemed to bear witness to her tireless vigilance, her subtle but profound defiance, and the moral clarity she instilled in those around her. Each step she took, each measured gesture, each act of protection or guidance resonated across the rows of labor, through the quarters, and into the hearts of those she served. Through Clara's sustained efforts, the enslaved were not merely enduring, they were asserting their humanity, cultivating resilience, and preserving moral agency in a world structured to strip both away. Her legacy, though silent and invisible to those in power, was tangible to those she guided, a living testament to the transformative power of quiet courage, strategic insight, and unwavering ethical leadership. The plantation's oppressive machinery remained relentless, yet Clara had carved spaces of autonomy, protection, and hope within its expanse. Through vigilance, empathy, and calculated action, she ensured that life, dignity, and moral agency persisted, offering a blueprint for resistance that transcended brute force, demonstrating that courage, strategy, and compassion could endure even amidst the harshest oppression. In these final reflections, it became evident that Clara's life on the plantation was not defined merely by survival, but by the deliberate cultivation of resilience, ethical leadership, and subtle rebellion. Every act, every intervention, every measure of care contributed to a larger narrative that humanity could assert itself, that dignity could be preserved, and that hope could flourish, even in the shadow of relentless brutality. Through her enduring example, Clara transformed the cotton fields from a symbol of oppression into a testament to courage, moral clarity, and the unbreakable power of human agency.